Questions to the Prime Minister.
The former Brexit, Mr. Speaker. The former Prime Minister's deal was unacceptable to this House, but to leave without a deal is unthinkable. Yet the Prime Minister pursues a game of brinkmanship built on the livelihoods, health and future of my constituents and our country. But there is still an option to resolve this once and for all. If the Prime Minister really believes in no deal, let him put it to the people and ask our people if that is the price they want to pay.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the Honourable Lady knows very well, this government will take this country out of the European Union on October the 31st. There is only one thing that stands in our way. It is the surrender bill currently being proposed by the leader of the opposition. And can I invite her to confirm, can I invite the leader of the opposition to confirm when he stands up shortly, that if that surrender bill is passed, he will allow the people of this country to have their view on what he is proposing to hand over in their name with an election on October the 15th, Mr. Speaker.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that when we leave the European Union on the 31st of October, no longer will we be subjected to EU rules on VAT in terms of our energy bills, costing Harlow constituents and households around £55 extra every year? Will he confirm that we will take back control of our energy bills and save households around £1.5 billion a year on the heating and lighting?
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend and for his excellent suggestion. As he knows, we do currently apply the reduced 5% rate on domestic fuel and power, which is the lowest allowed under EU law. But of course, when we leave the European Union on October the 31st, it will be open to us to change this for the benefit of the people of Harlow.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, it was revealed, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy is to run down the clock, and that the Attorney-General told the Prime Minister his belief that the European Union would drop the backstop was a complete fantasy. Are these reports accurate, or can the Prime Minister provide the detail of the proposals he's put forward to the EU?
The Prime Minister.
I tell you, Mr. Speaker, what our negotiating strategy is, and it is to get a deal by the summit on October the 17th, and to take this country out of the EU on October the 31st, to get Brexit done. And what his surrender bill would do, it would wreck any chance of the talks, and we don't know what his strategy is at all were he to take over. He's asking for mobs of momentum activists to paralyse the traffic in the name of his. What are they supposed to chant, Mr. Speaker? What is the slogan? What do we want? What do we want? Dither and delay. When do we want it? We don't know. That's his policy. That's his policy. And can he confirm again, now, that he will allow the people of this country to decide on what he is giving up in their name with a general election on October the 15th? Or is he frit?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, my first question to the Prime Minister, and no answer given. I asked what proposals have been put to the European Union. We asked yesterday, many colleagues asked, and the Prime Minister seems utterly incapable of answering. Any rational human being would assume, therefore, none have been put, and there is no answer to that question. The Prime Minister and his cabinet colleagues have been saying he's making progress. The EU's chief negotiator, the Chancellor of Germany, the Taoiseach of Ireland say no proposals have yet been made by the UK. If the Prime Minister thinks he's made progress, will he publish those proposals that he's put forward to replace the backstop?
Prime Minister.
As the right honourable gentleman knows very well, you don't negotiate in public, and we are making substantial progress, and we will get that backstop backstop out.
Order, Prime Minister, please, forgive me interrupting. There is a long way to go. There are a lot of questions to be reached. The questions must be heard, and the responses from the Prime Minister must and will be heard. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let us be absolutely clear. This government is going to get a deal from our friends in Brussels, and we will get the backstop out. We will get an agreement. I think this House can approve. The only thing that's standing in our way is the undermining of those negotiations by this surrender bill, which would lead to more dither and delay. We delayed in March, we delayed in April, and now he wants to delay again for absolutely no purpose whatever. What does he intend by this? We are spending, in this government, we're spending £1 billion to put 20,000 more police officers on the streets. He wants to spend £1 billion a month net to keep us in the EU beyond October the 31st. And I will never allow that.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Mr. Speaker, I really fail to see how I can be accused of undermining negotiations, because no negotiations are taking place. He's been Prime Minister for 6 weeks and he promised to get Brexit sorted. In 6 weeks, he's presented nothing to change the previous Prime Minister's deal, which he twice voted against. These negotiations that he talks about are a sham. All he's doing is running down the clock. At the weekend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said food prices will go up under no deal. Will the Prime Minister publish the Yellowhammer documents so that people can see which food prices will go up and by how much?
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster said absolutely no such thing. I can tell him the preparations for no deal, thanks to his good offices and thanks to his efforts, are very far advanced. But I tell you, the surest way of getting no deal is to undermine this country's ability to negotiate, which is what he is doing. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that if this bill is passed this afternoon, I have to say I don't want an election. I don't think he wants an election. But there's a petition on his own Labour. There's a petition on his own Labour website with 57,000 people, including Carol, Nigel, Graham, and Phoebe, calling for an election. I don't know whether there's a Jeremy on the list. But, Mr. Speaker, I know he's worried about free trade deals with America, but there's only one chlorinated chicken that I can see in this House, and he's on that bench. Will he confirm again? Will he confirm that he will let the people decide? Let the people decide on what he is doing to this country's negotiating position by having a general election on October the 15th.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Well, maybe the Prime Minister could tell us what the negotiating position actually is. And since the question I asked, the Prime Minister may have forgotten it in his rather lengthy peroration there, that the British Retail Consortium said, and I quote, that it was categorically untrue when the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster denied there would be shortages of fresh food. Mr. Speaker, I hope no more young female staff are going to be frog-marched out of Downing Street. Because there was another government leak at the weekend concerning, Mr. Speaker, concerning disruption of our ports. The leaked documents written by the government in the last fortnight show no deal would lead to shortages on the shelves and of medical supplies in hospitals. People need to prepare. So can I ask the Prime Minister again, will he publish in full the Yellowhammer documents so people can see which foodstuffs are not going to be available, which medicines are not going to be supplied, and what will happen to the shortages of vital supplies in every one of our hospitals all over this country?
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid that the Right Honourable Gentleman is guilty of the most shameless scaremongering. We have made ample preparations for coming out of the EU. What his party is recommending is yet...
Order! It's very difficult to hear the responses from the Prime Minister. Members must calm themselves. There is a long way to go. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what he is recommending is yet more dither, yet more delay, yet more uncertainty for business. What we in this government want to do is deliver on the mandate of the people. Now, he used to be a Democrat. He used to believe in upholding the referendum result. Can he say now whether he would vote in favour of leave or remain? And can he say now whether he's in favour of a second referendum or not?
Jeremy Corbyn!
The Prime Minister failed to answer my questions about food supply, about medicine supplies, and about the problems in hospitals. He refuses to publish the Yellowhammer documents, and he talks about scaremongering. Where does the information come from other than his office in his government? And he's obviously so confident of the position he's adopted, he's now preparing to spend £100 million of our money on an advertising campaign in order to try to persuade people that everything's fine. He knows it's not, they know it's not, he is hiding the facts. The government has refused to publish its impact assessments on how a no-deal Brexit would affect poverty levels in this country. They received a request under the Freedom of Information Act from the Glasgow-based Poverty Alliance. The DWP replied that the public interest would not be served by that disclosure. Will the Prime Minister publish that analysis? If he won't, what has he got to hide?
Mr. Speaker, unlike the Right Honourable Member who would squander £1 billion a month of taxpayers' money on staying pointlessly in the EU, this government is getting on with running a sound economy so that the poorest people in our country are seeing increases in their wages for the first time in more than a decade. And I'm proud to say that those on the living wage, Mr. Speaker, are now taking £4,500 more home every year than they were in 2010, thanks to this Conservative government.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Speaker, you don't have to go very far from the portals of this House to see real destitution. People begging and sleeping on the streets. Child poverty is up since 2010. Pensioner poverty is up. In-work poverty is up. And he won't give us any of the information of the assessments of increased poverty that could come from his government's proposals. We are less than 60 days away from leaving the EU with no deal. The Prime Minister has had 2 days in office before the summer recess and then planned to prorogue Parliament. Yesterday, he lost one vote, his first vote in Parliament, and he now wants to dissolve Parliament. He's desperate, absolutely desperate, to avoid scrutiny. And in his third day in office, after 5 questions from me, we haven't had an answer to any of them. I can see why he's desperate to avoid scrutiny. He has no plan to get a new deal, no plan, no authority, and no majority. Mr. Speaker.
Order. If we have to go on longer because people sitting on the Treasury bench are yelling to try to disrupt, so be it, we'll go on longer. Some people used to believe in good behaviour. I believe in good behaviour on both sides of the House. It had better happen or it will take a whole lot longer. Very simple, very clear. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the Prime Minister does to the country what he's done to his party in the past 24 hours, I think a lot of people have a great deal to fear from his incompetence, his vacillation, and his refusal to publish known facts that are known to him about the effects of a no-deal Brexit.
Mr.
Prime
Speaker,
Minister!
I really don't see how, with a straight face, the right honourable gentleman can accuse anybody of being unwilling to stand up to scrutiny when he will not agree to submit his surrender bill to the verdict of the people in an election. He's frightened. And Mr. Speaker, he makes a contrast. He makes a contrast between this government and his own proposals. The contrast could not be clearer. He thinks we think that the friends of this country are to be found in Paris and in Berlin and in the White House, and he thinks that they're in the Kremlin and in Tehran and in Caracas. And I think he's Caracas, Mr. Speaker. We're putting 20,000 police on the street. We're upgrading 20. We have 20 new hospital upgrades. We are growing the economy. He, by contrast, would put a £300 billion tax on every company in the country. He wants a tax on homes, and he's calling incessantly for a general strike. The Shadow Education Secretary says that their economic policy is, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, by your leave, shit or bust. I say it's both. I say it's both, Mr. Speaker. What this country needs is sensible, moderate, progressive, conservative government, and to take this country out of the EU on October the 31st, and that is what we are going to deliver.
Order. Will be more. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, Parliament once again defeated this shambolic Tory government. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have seized back control from a Prime Minister who is behaving like a dictator more than a Democrat. The Prime Minister must be stopped. MPs must unite across this House to take no deal off the table tonight. Mr. Speaker, we will defeat the government again. So can the Prime Minister tell us, when we succeed, will he respect the democratic vote of this House, the democratic will of the people we represent, and finally act to remove the threat of a catastrophic no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I might ask the right honourable gentleman if he will respect the democratic will of the people of the United Kingdom, as this House voted to do time and time and time again, and that is implement the result of the referendum.
Ian Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, I know he's a new boy, but can I suggest to him, we ask the questions, he's supposed to answer them. And, you know, quite simply, Mr. Speaker, me and my colleagues, we are sent here by the people of Scotland. We have a majority. The people of Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. We're not going to be dragged out against our will by the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also mustn't be paying attention to the polls this morning, which show that the SNP is polling to win a majority in Scotland once again, with the Tories in retreat. So if he wants an election, enable the bill and bring it on. It's clear for all of us to see that the Prime Minister is playing a game of bluff and bluster. He doesn't care about stopping a no-deal Brexit. His strategy, as his lead advisor put it, is a sham. This isn't a Parliament versus the people. It is a Parliament standing up for the people. Mr. Speaker, the people did not vote for a no-deal Brexit. This Prime Minister is robbing the people of power, handing control to the Leave campaign, a cult now running number 10. So once again I ask the Prime Minister, are you a dictator or are you a Democrat? Will the Prime Minister accept the legislation today so that no deal can be avoided? And let us vote for an election so that the people can truly decide the next steps.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm a Democrat because I not only want to respect the will of the people in respect of the referendum, but I also want to have an election, or I'm also willing to have an election if the right honourable gentleman opposite's terrible bill goes through. I tell you there's a reason, Mr. Speaker, why the separatists in Scotland drone on and on about breaking up, about smashing the oldest and most successful political union in it. There's a reason why they go on about it, and that is to detract from their appalling domestic record. They are a total shambles. Look at them. They have the highest taxes anywhere in Europe. They have their educational standards falling, for which they are responsible. They're responsible for it. And their signature policy, this is a useful one, their signature policy is to return, after Brexit, to return Scotland to the European Union, complete with the euro and the full panoply of EU laws, and, as I never tire of saying, Mr. Speaker, surrendering Scottish fish just when they've been taken back by this country.
Nicholas Chapman.
Mr. Speaker, you know I'm not a doomster or a gloomster, but on that positive note, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for boosting support for Scottish independence into his premiership, maybe his last few weeks in premiership. Prime Minister, according to the research published by the UK Trade Policy Observatory, a no-deal Brexit would cost up to 1,100 jobs in my Dunfermline and West Fife constituency and over 63,000 jobs across Scotland. Can the Prime Minister explain to me and my constituents who are facing this dreadful prospect and what their families should do in terms of the heavy price that they're paying for a Brexit they never voted for?
Yeah, of course, Mr. Speaker, we are preparing for a no-deal Brexit if we absolutely must. I don't think that the consequences will be anything like as bad as the merchants of Project Fear have said. But the way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to allow this government to get on and do a deal at the summit on October the 17th. And the choice for this country is who do they want doing that deal? This government or that Labour Party led by Jeremy Corbyn?
Yeah, we don't name people in the chamber. People must observe the rules. No, order. I am simply and politely informing the Prime Minister of the very long established procedure with which everybody, including the Prime Minister, must comply. That's the position. No doubt, no argument, no contradiction. End of the matter. Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, people in Swansea voted to leave the EU, but Leave voters are saying to me they didn't vote for a no deal. They didn't vote for do or die on 31st of October. They want to live. They voted for good things, for more money, for more jobs, more control, and now they see they're going to get less money, less jobs, less control. So they want the final say. So will he undertake, when he goes to extend Article 50 after the passage of this bill we're seeing this afternoon, will he ensure that there's a proper referendum so there's a choice between a managed deal and remain and not kamikaze no deal?
Prime Minister.
Well, I can tell the honourable gentleman that if he wants to put that matter to the people, then the best thing he can do is persuade his right honourable friend in the front row to summon up his courage, to stop being so frit, and if he's going to pass this wretched surrender bill, then at least to submit it to the judgment of the people in the form of a general election. And if he wants to implement the will of the people of Swansea, what he should do is vote with this government and not with the surrender bill tonight.
Mr. David Gauke.
The Prime Minister has said that the prorogation of Parliament was nothing to do with Brexit. Is that still his position?
Prime Minister.
As my right honourable friend knows full well, there has been demands for prorogation of Parliament in the form of a Queen's speech from the right honourable lady there, from across this House. This Parliament has lasted longer than any in the last 400 years, and on Brexit, there will be ample opportunity. There will be ample opportunity to debate the Brexit deal after October the 17th in this House if this government is allowed to get on and deliver a deal.
Mr. Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor today announced another £2 billion on top of the £6.3 billion already allocated to help companies after a no-deal Brexit. Industry, the public and Parliament have a right to know which industries will benefit, for how long, and what the total cost will be to the taxpayer. Can the Prime Minister tell us?
Minister.
I can tell the honourable gentleman that there is a great deal of preparatory work going on, and particularly in the West Midlands, which he represents, to make sure that automotive supply chains are indeed ready for a no-deal scenario. But we don't want a no-deal scenario, Mr. Speaker, and the way to avoid it is not to vote for the absurd surrender bill that is before the House today, and let the government get on and negotiate a deal, because that is what we want to do.
Mr. Douglas Ross.
Mr. Speaker, the Scotch whisky industry is hugely important in Murray, and the potential tariffs applied by the US as part of their trade war with the EU could cost hundreds of thousands of jobs across Scotland and the United Kingdom. So what representations has the Prime Minister made to President Trump on this matter, and will his government do everything possible to avoid these tariffs being applied to the Scotch whisky industry?
Prime Minister.
I congratulate my honourable friend on everything that he does to represent that vital industry, which indeed earns billions of pounds in revenue for this country. And I think that tariffs on Scotch whisky would be absolutely absurd, a point that we've made repeatedly to our friends in the United States. But again, when we do free trade deals around the world, Scotch whisky is one of those many products that will have its chances boosted in export markets where it is currently growing.
Aaron Lee.
Mr. Speaker, last weekend in Lincoln and right across the country, there were cross-party protests against prorogation of Parliament. Does this unelected Prime Minister, who's got no majority in this House, believe that his attack on our democracy is his only means of forcing a disastrous no-deal Brexit on Lincoln and on the businesses and people of this country?
Prime Minister.
Well, if she wants to speak for the people of Lincoln, who after all voted to leave, yes, they did. I think the best thing she could do is make sure that we come out of the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And if she is genuinely prepared to frustrate that ambition through the surrender deal being proposed today, then will she at least have a word with her friend on the front bench and urge him, since she speaks of democracy, urge him to submit his bill to the will of the people in the form of a general election on October the 15th. Will she at least say that to him?
Blomfield.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a desperate attempt to win yesterday's vote, the Prime Minister apparently made emotional appeals to Conservative MPs that he was serious in seeking a deal. But his answers in the House yesterday and today make it clear there are no real negotiations, in public or in private. Those with whom he claims to be negotiating in the European Union have said nothing has been put on the table. So does the Prime Minister understand why across this country people find it difficult to trust a word he says?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I tell the honourable gentleman that what I think the people of this country want to see is us come together to come out of the EU on October the 31st with a deal. We are making great progress with our friends and partners both in Brussels and in Dublin and even in Paris. But those talks are being currently undermined, I am afraid, by the absurd bill that is before the House today. I urge him to reject it, and if he must pass it, then can he have a word with his right honourable friend and ensure that that bill is put to the people in the form of a general election?
Dominic Green.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the Prime Minister's answer to my right honourable friend, the member for South West Hertfordshire, could the Prime Minister please then explain why it's proved impossible to find any official or minister prepared to state that the reasons for prorogation were to pave the way for a Queen's speech in the course of the current legal proceedings in which the government is involved? And would the Prime Minister like to reconsider the answer he's just given to the House?
Prime Minister.
I hesitate to advise my right honourable and learned friend about legal proceedings, but I think if he looks at what happened in Scotland this morning, he will discover that case was thrown out.
Gary Streeter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think I can comply with that. May I welcome the extra £14 billion recently announced for our schools, especially in southwest Devon, where I understand we have the largest increase in the country to correct historic underspending. Does my right honourable friend agree that this cash boost will help our hard-working teachers to prepare the next generation to reach their full potential? And won't it be wonderful once again, when we can get through Brexit, that we can start talking about education, health and social care, the things our constituents are really bothered about?
Well, exactly right, Mr. Speaker. I thank my friend. Exactly why we need to have this 3-year investment in education and get Brexit done, Mr. Speaker, on October the 31st, and don't be attracted to any more dither and delay and confusion under the Labour Party.
Vernon Coker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister yesterday booted out 21 MPs from his own party for voting against a reckless no-deal Brexit. These included very well-respected members of this House, including a former Chancellor, including Churchill's grandson, and the father of the House, presumably on the orders of his Chief of Staff. Given that the Prime Minister himself voted against the former Prime Minister's deal without losing the whip, does this not show and demonstrate to the British public his view of life? Namely, one rule for him and one rule for everyone else.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lessons from the Labour Party.
Order. Leave me to control the proceedings. I should be immensely grateful for your assistance in that regard. That heckling must cease, and we will hear the reply. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take any lectures from anybody in the Labour Party about how they run their party. Look, this is a party where MPs, good, hard-working MPs, are daily hounded out by anti-Semitic mobs. Let's be absolutely clear. If the Right Honourable Gentleman is actually interested in democracy, if he's interested in democracy, then I hope he's been listening to what I've been saying today. In an anti-democratic way, the bill before the House today would hand over this country's right to decide how long to remain in the EU, and it would hand it over to the EU itself. That's what that bill involves. If he thinks that's a good idea, then let him submit it to the judgment of the British people in an election.
McInnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the Director General of the CBI wrote to all MPs in the North West, urging us to do everything we can to get a deal that works for businesses in our region. The CBI says a no-deal Brexit would be disastrous for North West business, particularly small businesses. And we all know what the Prime Minister has said in the past about business. But now that he has assumed a position of some responsibility, will he stop this relentless posturing around no deal, listen to the CBI and work to protect our vital businesses?
Prime Minister.
Again, a bit rich from a member of a party whose shadow chancellor says that business is the enemy. And she should listen. She should listen. She should listen. Where is he? Not there. Where? He's gone. She should listen to the people of her constituency who voted to leave the EU and implement their wishes. And that is what this government is going to do.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, much has been made about provision for EU nationals resident in the United Kingdom post-Brexit. Much less comfort has been offered to those 1.5 million United Kingdom nationals resident throughout the rest of the European Union. Is the Prime Minister in a position to confirm, not on a piecemeal but on a pan-European basis, that all pensions will be paid in full, that exportable benefits will continue to be paid in full, that healthcare will be covered in full, and that rights of domicile and freedom of movement will be protected. There are frightened people who need an answer.
Prime Minister!
I thank my right honourable friend, and I can assure him that that matter is, of course, at the top of our concerns with all our EU friends and partners, and we've made it absolutely clear, Mr. Speaker, that the very, very generous offer that this country has rightly made to the 3.4 million EU citizens here in this country must be reciprocated symmetrically and in full by our friends in the way that he has described.
Stephen Morgan!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has said the great city of Portsmouth is too full of obesity and drug addiction. Despite this disgraceful, inaccurate statement about my home city, how would he expect our much-loved NHS to deal with these issues when it is his government who is exposing us to medicine and staff shortages, according to his own health secretary, by hurtling us towards a no-deal Brexit?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I must correct the honourable gentleman, because in fact unemployment is well down in his constituency, employment is up, and health outcomes are up. And when I made those remarks, which was many years ago, it was I'm afraid when his constituency had the sad misfortune to have a Labour government in power. That is no longer the case.
Margaret James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The great lady who you and I both revere, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, once said, "Advisers advise, ministers decide." Can I ask the Prime Minister to bear that statement closely in mind in relation to his own chief adviser, Dominic Cummings?
Well, Mr. Speaker.
Order! The reply must be heard. If the House were to want, as a matter of course, to allow clapping by decision of the House, so be it, but it should not otherwise become a regular practice. But we've heard the question, pungently expressed. Let's hear the answer from the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I'm used to breasting applause from Labour audiences, particularly since, unlike the gentleman opposite, we are actually devoted to delivering on the mandate of those Labour constituencies, and we are going to take the UK out of the EU on October the 30th. And as for the excellent question that my honourable friend asked, be in no doubt that we are deciding on a policy to take this country forward, not backwards, as he would do.